After 7 long episodes, Ainz is now finally getting himself involved a bit. Before, he was content taking a backseat to the Paladins, but now that they've set out to do their first raid, their failure to meet his expectations forced him to take action. It was a sequence of events that brought about one of the core messages of the entire movie. Power is everything. How we get there is a little different from how we saw in the movie though, so that's what I'm gonna talk about here. There were a few grim twists a bit too dark to include in the movie. So, if you want to know what those were, then stick around as we'll be covering all of that. To quickly switch things over to another power fantasy first, I'm super excited to announce that because of you guys, I've been able to help create this officially licensed collab with Solo Leveling. That's right, earlier this year I joined the team for a statement of, and together with them we've put together this beautiful streetwear collection. We've really upped our game since our last release, since in addition to that same high quality clothing you've come to expect from me, we started adding features like embroidered text, stitched on patches, and custom tagging. So, in this fully licensed collection, you'll find a tee for Sung, a tee for Chahain, and a tee for the Shadows, the embroidered Arise hoodie with the shadows on the back, then my personal favorite, long sleeve layered tee for Beru. It's a brand new style perfect for the fall season. We've also got these limited edition Igris tees too, a piece we wanted to stand out as a collector's item. I'll talk more about them at the end though, so for now I just want to say thanks since something like this wouldn't have been possible without any of you. It's for that reason we wanted to ensure we create the best of the best for you, and we hope you'll see that if you choose to order one. So the link to that will be down in the description. Part 8. The Raid. With Gustav having just picked Ainz's brain for opinions on their plan, he was now looking for an idea of which prisoner camp would be best to attack first. While this was something Ainz could help with, he first needed more information about them. Specifically a map with details on where they were and what the region looked like. This was a particularly difficult request for Gustav though, since in a world like this, maps were national treasures. The more detailed one was, the easier it was to attack and defend something. So to willingly provide a potential enemy this information wasn't the smartest. It's the reason why Gustav would actually decline his request. That would have been that if not for Nea, since so long as she was there, she wouldn't allow Ainz to be refused. If they were going to borrow his wisdom and use him to save their country, then the least they could do was provide him with what he needed. Of course, Gustav didn't like Nea speaking for him, but the moment she mentioned giving him the maps, the offer couldn't be refused anymore. Luckily, there weren't really any maps available, but what Nea offered instead was her own insight. A verbal recount of everything she knew about the region's geography. That's when Gustav would leave to let them talk, after which Ainz would acknowledge what it is Nea was trying to do for him. As much as he appreciated it, he felt the need to reiterate he was also here for his own benefit. He wanted to make clear the maids were definitely something worth fighting over. Ainz was, however, bothered by the way the Paladins organized themselves, finding their decision-making processes archaic. With the way they weren't structured like a monolith, the differing number of opinions certainly made choosing a plan difficult. So Ainz would then ask if they ever settled things by a majority vote, an idea Nea could only visualize as a wonderful dream. The same sentiment was also shared by Ainz because that too was a structure he seemed to miss dearly. He would gaze up to the ceiling in deep contemplation, clearly looking much farther away than what was in front of him. It's not clear whether that's towards his guild or his old world, but it was definitely him reminiscing. Now, finally we get to the night of the raid, the location chosen based on a number of factors. The first was distance, as they wanted to attack a camp as far away from their own as possible. The second was that they had to get there by sea, since traveling by boat meant that it was easier to hide their tracks. Combine the two together and what you get are movements that would be difficult for any enemy to confirm. The main problem with a route like this though is that going too far increased the likelihood of being spotted by a scouting party. That being the case, the group decided to only attack a camp as far away as manageable. Now, what makes the whole subsequent attack quite comedic is that Ainz was genuinely excited to see the Paladins in action. No one had told him what their plan for attack was, so he was curious to see how the Holy Kingdom strategized. Would they use some sort of special ability to bust down the gate, or would they instead fly over the wall in an all-out assault? Ainz fully expected the paladins not to hold back at all, so he had high hopes in witnessing skills and abilities he'd never seen before. Nea, however, knew Ainz was only going to end up disappointed, but that wasn't something she was going to tell him. She instead decided it was best to let him see for himself. Reason being that the Holy Kingdom's offensive strategy was pretty basic. All it was to have angels engage from overhead while infantry would charge at the ground level. This was the way the Holy Kingdom always did things, and there was no reason to think that this time would be any different. I mean, it's not like they had the forces to do anything different anyway. So, that's exactly what we saw in the movie, and as expected, Ainz was a bit surprised by their choice to open the gate via battering ram. He would quickly ask why not use ladders or traverse the wall with magic, but that was a question Nea couldn't answer. It was a perplexing situation since, from what Ainz did know, paladins were capable of casting flight magic. That being the case, it was likely that that was just too high of a tier for them. The thing about paladin magic in particular, though, is that theirs didn't come in the form of arcane, faith, or psychic magic. No, for paladins their magic was cast via an energy known as providence. Why then were they not using that here? Well, that's what made Ainz so confused. Ainz's knowledge of other magic went to impress Nea since it just went to further highlight his brilliance. Ainz didn't think so highly of it himself though, as if it was something a potential enemy might be able to use against him, then it was definitely something worth knowing about. It's for that reason Ainz made the effort to learn about as many types of magic as possible. He recalled how he never had much natural ability himself, so the way to make up for it was with effort. As one of his close friends always said, the more you know, the closer you are to victory. It was tough for Nea to believe that Ainz once didn't have talent, but rather than focus on that, she instead wanted to talk about the plan. She figured now that Ainz saw just how basic their strategy was, perhaps he could suggest something better now. Ainz quickly declined and mentioned how freeing the prisoners was their job, but as right as he was, Nea still wanted his advice anyway. This was, after all, a battle to rescue innocent people who were suffering. If getting Ainz's help meant saving the most people the fastest, then asking for it directly was something she had no problem doing. It's for that reason Nea decided to beg, knowing full well doing so could be perceived as rude. That's when Ainz would reiterate the paladins needed to figure this out for themselves, since with this being only the first raid of many, it was up to them to figure out what worked. Only then would they be able to truly learn how best to free their people. So, in the end, the whole thing could be chalked up to success being born out of failure. Sure, this and the next raids might not work out, but by accepting those outcomes and continuing on without the fear of failure, only then could they truly pave a path to success. So, in a way, Ainz was doing what was best for them without doing anything. He made clear they needed to rebuild their country independently. He wasn't always gonna be by their side after. Unfortunately, this meant sacrifices were gonna be inevitable, but if they were on the path of progress, then that meant they were necessary. This was the message Nea felt Ainz was telling her. It led her to question the norms and values she grew up with. She would wonder, was it truly okay to accept sacrifices in order to maintain their independence, and was it truly justice to go along with it? In an ideal world, saving more people was always better, but now Nea wasn't so sure anymore. For now, all she could do was trust in Ainz and believe in the abilities of the paladins that were fighting. Now, you'd think there was only one raid since that's what we saw in the movie, but in reality there were many. The movie seems to combine elements from all of them, so the first raid in the novel was actually the one against these Baffolk. First, Ainz would make sure to check whether the paladins properly encircled the camp, since if just a single enemy escaped, then that meant the war would be lost to them. They couldn't risk letting Yaldabaoth know they were making moves to expand their army like this. So, Nea quickly confirmed that this was the case, surprised by the fact Ainz was so well versed in tactics like this. She wondered how it was he had come to learn so much. To her, it didn't make sense for him to bother, since in a world like this, beings with tough skin didn't wear armor just as those with sharp claws didn't carry a sword. Humans were forced to carry both, since with no natural advantages at all, they instead had to rely on clever tactics to adapt to their weaknesses. That being the case, why then was it that someone as all-powerful as Ainz found the need to be familiar with the tactics of attacking a castle? Sure, it made sense for a human since they weren't capable of single-handedly massacring one, but for Ainz that much was simple. It was a curious enough situation that Nea felt the need to ask about it. Ainz would be rather straight with his answer, mentioning how that same friend from before had taught him. Realistically, he had taught himself through a number of means, but the fundamentals supposedly came from him. Nea would then ask if this friend of his was strong, a question to which Ainz would say yes and no to. You see, his strength may not have been in magic or fistfights, but the other areas where he excelled certainly made up for it. In fact, Ainz truly believed he probably still wasn't as strong as him. This then led him to chuckle, an act which would spur quite the interesting thought from Nea. With the way Ainz was when it came to his conversations with her, she was starting to wonder if he could have been a human before. The only reason she didn't outright believe it is because it shouldn't be possible to turn oneself into an undead. All her life she was taught undead were born involuntarily. Once again, this was something she wasn't so sure about anymore, as Ainz had constantly been proving the world was far bigger than she imagined. So it was then that Ainz would ask whether Nea was going to join the battle or not, a conversation we saw was intended to push his marketing strategy. The raid would then proceed just like how we saw in the movie, culminating in the Bawfolk using a little girl as leverage. Now, I know in the movie it was a young boy, but that's actually the hostage that comes after her. What then happened to this little girl? Well, it was a predicament where Nea felt she was the only person who could do something about it. With the bow and the skills to use it, she really was the only person who could save the girl without injuring her. She knew she was in no way skilled enough to make such a difficult shot, but considering the circumstances, she felt she'd have to try anyway. In the meantime, the paladins were debating other options, all focused on saving the girl first. They were in a deadlock trying to figure out which options were best while presenting the least risk. The whole process is what spurred Ainz to get involved himself, since the moment the Bawfolk saw the hostage was effective, Ainz knew they would be sure to send the message they aren't just bluffing. Such was information Remedios refused to acknowledge, and sure enough, just as Ainz predicted, the Bawfolk would slit the girl's throat right in front of them. They had seen the hostage was giving them the space they needed and figured they could order the paladins around if they showed them they were serious. It was after that the Bawfolk would bring out a second hostage, the young boy we saw in the movie. So I can understand why such a grim scene wouldn't be included, but the whole thing just proved Ainz was right. Now that the paladins knew the Bawfolk were serious, they were completely under their thumb just like how the Bawfolk wanted. They would then be ordered to round up their troops and retreat, including the ones who were sent to block the other exits. Doing so would result in the Liberation Army losing the war though, so now more than ever, Ainz felt the need to say something. It was an intervention that would only lead Remedios to crash out, eventually resulting in Nea getting involved. Since Remedios was so focused on saving everyone, Nea knew she needed someone other than Ainz to suggest otherwise. It's for that reason she would resolve herself to be that person, knowing that this was probably one of those necessary sacrifices Ainz was talking about earlier. Still, Remedios refused to accept that, so Ainz decided it was best to take matters into his own hands. He would approach the gate just like how we saw in the movie, be warned not to come any closer by the Bawfolk, then respond with a complete disregard for it. Ainz knew he needed to repair the image that hostages didn't work, and dismissing the value of one human life was the only way to do that. So he would then declare his objective was to only kill the Bawfolk, a message made clear by the combination of Fireball with Maximized Magic Shockwave. This would not only destroy the watchtower, but would also blow the gate open with the most damage Shockwave was capable of. So the whole scene was met by immense disapproval from Remedios, but for the others like Gustav, he would actually thank Ainz. It was clear they knew that this was the best course of action, it's just none wanted to act on it because it went against their justice. Now, to further expand on why Ainz did what he did, he would straight up quote how Lanchester's laws work, a real-world mathematical formula that helps to calculate the relative strengths of military forces. In this situation, Ainz was trying to reduce the risk of losing even one paladin, since to diminish their force in any way would prove detrimental to them. It's for that reason that he wanted to eliminate the risk that would come with the Bawfolk running around with hostages. That would only make the paladins hesitate, and that was sure to lead to injury or worse. By showing the hostages were useless, though, the retreating Bawfolk likely wouldn't go out of their way to harm the prisoners. I mean, when running for your life, killing unarmed, unresisting people likely wasn't high up on your list of priorities. This was the assumption Ainz was operating under, and in the end, it was sure to save the most amount of people, both prisoners and paladins. If they had gone and done things Remedios' way, though, then it was fully possible that they wouldn't have been able to save anyone at all. Ainz' next statement about doing things for his children was first preceded by a declaration of him wanting to make his name known far and wide. That was his goal, I'm sure, in the beginning, but now it seems he's decided he didn't have to force that. Such a thing was sure to come naturally, so all he wanted now was to make sure him and his children could live in happiness. Nea doubted an undead could even have children, so she assumed he was referring to the people of his nation. And if that was in fact the case, then she couldn't even begin to imagine what was going through his mind knowing he had to take the life of someone he wanted to protect. Either way, this ideal place Ainz seemed to envision seemed wonderful. In the end, it was all to express how justice was different for everyone, so if Nea really wanted to know what justice was to her, then that was something she would have to figure out on her own, not copy from someone else's beliefs. This led Nea to ask what Ainz would have done if it was one of his own subordinates taken hostage, a question they apparently went to answer themselves already. That's right, a long time ago, Ainz decided to ask what they would do if they were taken hostage. Unsurprisingly enough, every single one of them said they'd just kill themselves so as to not be a burden. Of course, Ainz found their answers rather extreme, and to know they were so devoted was just frustrating to him. He wished they would at least wait for a rescue attempt. Nea couldn't even begin to try and understand the type of complaint Ainz was making, so instead she just let Ainz continue with his grumbling. It was shortly after that Remedios would return from the camp, glare at Ainz, then head back in. Gustav would emerge in her stead, and this time he would formally thank Ainz for Remedios. Normally, Remedios would have done so herself, but apparently she was upset by the tragic state her people were found in. What was that tragedy? Well, according to some of the rescued, many of the prisoners were getting their skin torn off. It wasn't even the demi-humans who were doing this, but rather demons that Yaldabaoth was sent over. So, despite Remedios seeming rude in her actions, turns out she actually had a good reason for it. Now, considering how deranged such actions were, Nea and Gustav were just as perplexed as Ainz was. Though they would ask if Ainz had any insight, he too was genuinely puzzled and curious as to why Yaldabaoth would do that. The only way they could explain it was by chalking it up to the actions of a demon. It was very possible they just simply wanted to torment humans. Setting that topic aside, it was after a large majority of the camp was cleared that the prisoners would be released just like how we saw in the movie. This next scene brings up an important topic since it's the first time Nea would be exposed to the importance of power. So Ainz's words here weren't to mock this father or his weakness, they were meant to highlight one of the most fundamental laws of this world. If you're strong, you can do anything, and if you're weak, then everything can be taken from you. It's for that reason Ainz seeks out power himself, since he was well aware to encounter someone stronger meant that he could lose everything. And if his goal was to protect the children of his country, then that meant even more power was needed. It was a mindset that helped Nea to see everything really was about power. Ainz did make sure to also put the blame on the Holy Kingdom too, since while yes, the father was at fault for being weak, it was also the fault of the weak country that was supposed to be sheltering them. He proclaimed that if this was his country, this sort of tragedy would have never happened. He would have done everything in his power to defend the people and drive the invaders off. While this perspective on life was certainly cruel, no one could refute it since they knew that this was how it was. I mean, they did just experience it firsthand after all. And for anyone else foolish enough to actually try and refute it, everyone knew they would be arguing out of emotion instead of reason. Ainz's logic was based on cold hard facts, nothing else. So, knowing he couldn't do anything against Ainz, the father would instead turn his anger towards Nea. He would ask why it was an undead was here. It was before Nea could even answer, though, that Ainz would boldly state it was to save their country. It was yet another cold hard truth their people would just have to accept. Like, if them and their country weren't so weak as to be invaded, then Ainz wouldn't need to be here to save them. That's just how it was. So, it was once that was over that Ainz would murmur to himself one last message. Nea wasn't sure whether it was for the man or for himself, but the tone of it made it seem like it was a reassurance of himself. What was that message? Well, it was the fact that if he were weak, he would lose everything too. It's for that reason Ainz knew he could never stop seeking out power, since he needed to remember that there could always be someone as strong as him out there. So, that's where this raid ends and the next one begins, but that's something I'll talk about in the next video. It'll cover the fight between Ainz and Buzzer. For now, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then be sure to leave a like and comment. Now, before I go, don't forget to check out my new officially licensed solo leveling collection. It's a project the team and I have been working on for quite some time now, and it's the first of many that I plan to be a part of. Mugen will still focus on niche isekai like Overlord and Mushoku Tensei, while A Statement Of is the brand which will carry the more mainstream IPs. Just know we've got lots more to come in the future, and it's only possible with the support of all of you. So be sure to check out this high-quality streetwear. I promise you won't be disappointed by it. But anyway, until next time, ciao!